Grand Ole Opry. Think about it, and the image of a certain lady comes to mind. She's not a fancy lady. She doesn't wear makeup or stylish clothes. She's a country girl, or was. Scrubbed and shining and dolled up in a Saturday night dress. She wears a straw hat with a bunch of flowers plopped on top. A price tag dangles from the brim. It was once an oversight. Now it's a trademark. She's never been much of a singer or a musician either, yet she's as much identified with country music as any performer you can name. She's an original, America's cousin, Minnie Pearl.
I think some of the most vivid memories I'll have of Minnie was when she performed at the Grand Ole Opry with Roy Acuff. When those two were on stage, it was electrifying. The flash bulbs would pop off and on, and it just lit the entire auditorium. Roy would always introduce her as, here's a little girl from Grinders Switch, and we've been all over the world together. And then he would shout or sing out, Cousin Minnie Pearl. Cousin Minnie Pearl. And she would come out with that big grin on her face.
I'm just so proud to be here. Well, sir, I'll tell you, a fella paid me a compliment just now. Yeah, he said I look like a breath of spring. Well, he didn't use them words. He said I look like the end of a hard winter.
Seemed like I was a baby when I first heard of Minnie Pearl. And I think you heard of Minnie Pearl before you heard of Minnie Pearl, the person, who she was, what she did, or anything. Minnie Pearl was a part of Americana.
Minnie Pearl is a household word all over the world, and I know that to be a fact because I've toured the world. It didn't matter where you go. Minnie Pearl. How's Minnie Pearl?
People don't realize this was one of the smartest women, was one of the smartest women in America. I mean, business-wise and otherwise.
I think she set her sights out to entertain the rural people, the people who would tune in to Grand Ole Opry. And she knew what people like and what kind of comedy made them laugh. And she talked about things that people could relate to. Everybody's got an Uncle Nabob, and everybody's got a dumb brother.
Minnie Pearl was born Sarah Ophelia Colley in Centerville, Tennessee in 1912. Centerville is about 50 miles southwest of Nashville and not far at all from a train crossing called Grinders Switch. Little Sarah Ophelia was a late arrival to her family. It never occurred to Fanny Tate Colley that she might have another child. Her youngest, Dixie, was already in the first grade, and Tom Colley had long since resigned himself to the fact that he would never have the son he always wanted. When Fanny discovered she was pregnant at 37, she and Tom were both shocked and thrilled.
Her father owned a lumber mill there, and the lumber mill pretty much was the town. Now, they weren't wealthy people by our standards today, but they lived very well for that time and that town. Her mother was definitely the social leader of the town. Centerville was just a little country town. Her father never drove a car, refused to get a car, although he got her mother the biggest, prettiest car in town. They were the first family to have a bathroom that was hooked up, plumbing. First family to have a car. The father always rode his horse, so he said he would never trust an automobile. But he would ride in the car if somebody else drove, but he said he wouldn't put his weight down all the way.
My grandfather was a charming man. He was 20 years older than my grandmother, and very, very attractive, very handsome, and had the most marvelous sense of humor. And I think that's where Ophelia got her sense of humor, because my grandmother had no sense of humor.
She took more after her father, both in her sense of humor and in her outrageousness. And when she was a little girl, her sisters always encouraged her to show off. They were always teaching her little songs and dance. She played piano by ear from the time she was about 4 years old. Her favorite room in the house was the library. And so they had a window seat in this room, and Minnie would take the cushion off the window seat, and that was her stage. And her older sisters would sit around at her feet and just applaud everything she did. Everything she did was wonderful and cute. So she grew up thinking she was the cutest thing in town and had no inhibitions whatsoever about performing in front of people.
One day, Mrs. Colley told little Ophelia to answer the door if anyone called, and she'd be down in a minute. Two ladies came to the door. The 8-year-old child invited them in and went to tell her mother. While she was out in the hall, she overheard one of the ladies say, "My, she's a plain little thing, isn't she?" The other lady agreed. Minnie told friends in later years the woman's words had stung, but she had known in her heart it was the truth. The words made a deep impression on her, and they were actually to be a help years later. Sarah Ophelia came to realize she would never be the beautiful, dramatic actress of her dreams. Her forte would be comedy. When she finished high school in 1929, Ophelia wanted more than anything to study drama at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts and then go on to a career on the Broadway stage. But the stock market crash that October brought a change of plans. Overnight, America was in the depths of a depression, and Tom Colley's lumber mill was severely affected. Suddenly, there was no money to send Ophelia to New York. Her dream of stardom would have to wait. Minnie was sent to Ward Belmont, a 2-year finishing school in Nashville, which boasted a fine drama department. Miss Pauline Sherwood Townsend, the drama director, was known throughout the South for her work in the performing arts.
Minnie has always credited Miss Townsend with being one of the greatest influences in her life as far as teaching her about stage presence. Because at that time, remember, Minnie still wanted to be a dramatic actress. I mean, that's all she cared about. The idea of being a comedian to her at that time was totally foreign. Minnie had a great saying about, she would say, if you want to make God laugh, just tell him your plans, because he's got other plans for you.
Ophelia felt herself to be a fish out of water at Ward Belmont. The other girls were cliquish, coming from well-to-do families. Everyone seemed more worldly than Ophelia Colley from Centerville, and Miss Townsend seemed unimpressed with Ophelia's raw performing skills. She longed to call her daddy in tears and begged to come home. Midway through her first semester, still friendless and despondent in her loneliness, Ophelia wandered into an empty rec hall and sat down at the piano. She started banging out some of the liveliest songs she knew, singing at the top of her lungs, the way she had for her sisters back in Centerville. Suddenly, she got the feeling she was being watched. 3 girls had come in. Ophelia stopped playing instantly, embarrassed, wondering how long they'd been standing there. Then one of them said, "Hey, don't stop. That was great."
These were 3 of the most popular girls on campus, and they were Hot, Dot, and Annie with their names, if you can believe that. They were seniors, and she was this little freshman, so they took her under their wing and introduced her around, and then from that point on, she was in her element at Ward Belmont and loved it.
By the time graduation day came in the spring of '32, Ophelia Colley was one of the most popular girls at school, a far cry from the intimidated little thing she had been 2 years earlier. Minnie was to say that nobody cried louder or harder than she did standing on the steps of Academic Hall at sunset while she sang her alma mater. She cried going in and she cried going out.
The Life and Times of Minnie Pearl returns in a moment on TNN.
When your nose is sore, does your tissue make it worse?
TNN.
When Ophelia graduated from Ward Belmont in the spring of 1932, she had to face the fact that there was no money for her further education in dramatics. She needed to find a job right away to support herself and help out the family. But she wasn't qualified to do anything but teach dramatics, piano, and dancing. Reluctantly, she opened a little performing arts studio in Centerville in connection with the high school. Centerville was a far cry from Broadway, but Ophelia was still short of 21, and in those days, young women did not strike out on their own until they were of age. And besides, there was not much chance Tom Colley was going to allow his baby daughter to run off to New York. In 1934, after 2 seasons of teaching, Ophelia saw an opportunity to take a step toward her goal.
She got a job with the Wayne P. Sewell Company, which was a production company based in Noonan, Georgia. And what the Wayne P. Sewell Company did was train young women to be directors of plays that Mrs. Sewell had written that included singing and dancing. And these young girl directors would then spread out all over the South and go to small towns and put on a play in that town using all the local people as the talent.
Tom and Fanny were not happy with the idea of their youngest daughter leaving home, and absolutely hated the thought of her having anything to do with show business. But Ophelia was desperate to get out of Centerville. It was the only road she could see toward the fulfillment of her dream. It seemed like the perfect job, singing, dancing, and fun. She was to learn early there was more to it than that, and the most she would ever earn would be $10 a week.
Minnie told me many times that those 7 years with the Sewell Company was the physically most incredibly difficult work she'd ever done. Now, I don't know if you know anything about the road in country music, but if somebody who has been on the road for 27 years in country music consecutively can say to you that that other work was the hardest they ever did, then it'll give you some picture.
As a Sewell director, Ophelia traveled with a large trunk containing the costumes. There was no provision in the show budgets for lodging, so in each town, Ophelia would have to stay with a local family.
And she just fit right in the community. She would live with them. She would help do the chores, and she would help cook and clean. And then when the work was all done at night, they would get together and rehearse these plays.
A lot of these people were very, very poor, and they would share with her whatever they had. But during that period, she stayed in literally hundreds of different homes throughout the South, and almost always the rural South.
One wintry evening in 1936, Ophelia arrived to stay with a family in Bayleton, Alabama.
Now, Minnie to this day has never told this family's name because she was always afraid that in some way she might embarrass them.
It was a little old lady who had, I think, 12 or 13 children and a father, and the only child still left at home was a son who was grown and who probably was maybe a little retarded or a little slow, and they called him Brother.
During her stay, Ophelia became fascinated with this simple country woman.
She was an innocent, funny woman who didn't know she was funny, very guileless. All of the qualities that Minnie Pearl, the character Minnie Pearl, later developed.
That kindly old woman stuck in Ophelia's mind long after the young director had left Bayleton. She had been collecting country stories and anecdotes from the time she'd begun on the road and had entertained herself and others by performing them in dialect. But Ophelia had never considered building a character around them. It was as if now there was an image, a character to go with the stories and the dialect.
But anyway, we went over and we got us a chicken or two. Me and Brother, we started that new flock I was telling you about. We got us 50 hens and 50 roosters. I don't want nobody to be a wallflower. That ought to happen even to a hen. I've been there. Well,
this woman stayed in her mind, and later, when she was called upon to do some funny things in a part of her Sewell work, this woman came back to her and she started just imitating her voice and the way she talked. And she named her Minnie Pearl because Minnie and Pearl are both very common rural Southern names.
Miss Tugwell said the other day she was washing one of her little young'uns and the telephone rung in the next room. She went in there to answer the telephone. She come back and that little young'un was gone. Couldn't find him no place. And she knowed he was running around in his little birthday suit. And she heard a noise out on the back porch and she hollered out there and she said, "Are you running around out there without your little panties on?" And a man's gruff voice said, "No, ma'am, I'm reading the light meter."
Her Sewell years taught Minnie more about performing and show business than she could have learned from any amount of schooling. They were the toughest of her life, but they were filled with fun and adventure, and best of all, they gave her Minnie Pearl. As the 30s decade came to a close, the Sewell Production Company's bookings were shrinking fast. The material that had been so fresh 10 or 15 years earlier now seemed corny and silly. Rural America could now tune into radio and listen to recordings for its entertainment. Movies had come to the bigger towns. In the spring of 1940, Ophelia returned to Centerville, not in the triumph she had hoped for, but feeling utterly defeated. She was 28 years old, was broke, and had no job or prospects for one. She considered herself a failure, and maybe worst of all, an old maid. In desperation, Ophelia took a job running a recreation center for the WPA. Once in a while, as an amusement or occasionally for extra money, she would perform for local charity events as Minnie Pearl, the little country girl.
It's the first time, long time ago, first time I ever took Brother to town, all the fellas run from me. One fella pointed his finger at Brother and said, "What's the matter with that old boy? He's got the smallpox? He's got spots all over his face." I said, "No, Brother ain't got the smallpox. We just been trying to learn him to eat with a fork." But you know what?
She decided that she needed a town where Minnie Pearl would be from, and she didn't want to use Centerville, her hometown, because she didn't want the people in Centerville to think that she was poking fun at any of them. So there was a little railroad switch outside of Centerville, close to where her father had his lumber business, called Grinder's Switch, and there was no town really there, so she created a town based in Grinder's Switch and created all of the characters that would then live in Grinder's Switch.
Now all Ophelia needed was a costume for this character of hers. She thought Minnie Pearl should dress like a country girl going to town on Saturday afternoon for a little trading and a little flirting. She rummaged around in a sundry store and found an outfit that would define Minnie Pearl. Dress, bow, stockings, shoes, hat, and purse. Together, they cost less than $10. The first hat came without a price tag. That touch would come later. That same night, performing at a banquet, Ophelia dressed for the first time as Minnie Pearl. Adding the costume brought her character to life. She was no longer acting a part. Dressed as Minnie, Ophelia became Minnie. In October 1940, Minnie Pearl performed for a bankers' convention in Centerville. She had been requested as an afterthought to kill time while they waited for the featured speaker who was driving down from Nashville.
He said, "Well, them old heifers just so happy when they hear them political speeches. Look like they don't know one kind of bull from another."
That night, Minnie performed flawlessly. She was loose and relaxed in front of her audience. After all, there was no reason to be nervous. She was just killing time. After she got home, her mother, Fanny, asked her how the performance went. "All right, I guess," Ophelia told her. "It was fun." She had absolutely no inkling that she had just passed the most important test of her life.
The Life and Times of Minnie Pearl returns in a moment on TNN.
I'm just so proud to be here, Welster.
One of the bankers Minnie had entertained went back to Nashville and told a friend at WSM Radio that he'd seen a girl in Centerville who'd be a natural for the Grand Ole Opry. A week later, Minnie got the phone call of her young life. They wanted her to audition for the Opry. When radio executives saw her act, they had serious doubts about putting her on the show. They were afraid the Opry audience might see her as a phony, an actress taking off on country people. Minnie had to convince them she wasn't making fun of these people, but was only trying to entertain them. She loved country folk, she assured the executive. She was one of them.
Well, sir, I was telling you, that boy's been having trouble with the sheriff lately, and we took him to the doctor, and the doctor said he'd have to drain him. And he said to Brother, he says, "What you been doing, going in swimming?" Brother said, "Nope, been eating watermelon."
Oh, that's the most exciting time. I remember I was about 9 or 10, and we all listened, you know, and it was so exciting. And they drove up from Centerville with my grandmother sitting there, you know, the grande dame that she always was. And my grandfather had died by then. He would have loved it.
Minnie was extremely nervous, and I think she was probably pacing backstage before she went on. And Judge Hay came up to her and said, "Honey, just love your audience and they'll love you back." And I think she always did that in her live performances, but also in her life, in real life. She always loved everyone that she met.
Minnie Pearl performed her routine quietly before a sparse Opry audience that night. Some of them were people who had come in just to get out of the cold. When she got off the stage, she asked her mother how she had done. "Well," said Fanny Colley with encouragement, Several people woke up. To Minnie's great relief, she was invited back the following week. When she got to the Opry, the receptionist handed her a pile of more than 300 letters that had come in during the week addressed to Minnie Pearl, all in response to 3 minutes of airtime at 11 o'clock at night. Minnie Pearl had found her audience. Based on audience reaction, Minnie was offered a permanent slot on the Opry. She would be paid $10 a week for appearing each Saturday night. For the same amount, Ophelia Colley had had to work all week with the WPA. In 1940, Roy Acuff was already king of the Grand Ole Opry. During the week, he toured with his Smoky Mountain Boys, performing throughout the South within a radius that would allow them to get back to Nashville for the Opry show on Saturday night. After her first month on the Opry, Minnie was asked by Acuff to join his traveling show. She would receive $50 a week beyond her Opry salary. It would be the beginning of 27 years of one-night stands on the road for Minnie Pearl.
They would ride with a bass fiddle on top of the car if the weather was good. But when it started to rain, they had to put that bass fiddle inside the car. And they would be maybe 6 of them in a car with this bass fiddle, and they'd have to ride with this bass fiddle, you know, and their necks all craned over. And maybe they'd be 500 or 600 miles away from Nashville on Saturday and have to drive all the way back, do the Grand Ole Opry, and turn right around and maybe go perform within 75 miles or 50 miles of where they started out Saturday morning, do a Sunday show.
As well as Minnie was received on the Opry, the road shows with Acuff were another story. Her Opry performances were short, just over 3 minutes. On the road, she was expected to fill 20 minutes. She hadn't yet had the time to develop that much material. Minnie knew she wasn't cutting it, and it was only a matter of time before Acuff let her go.
She never felt badly toward Roy Acuff for letting her go, because she knew that he was right. But she felt just so sad and depressed that she didn't know how she would ever get another chance. If you fail with Roy Acuff, who was the star of country music, where do you go from there?
Minnie went home and asked her sister Virginia to help her write and refine new material. She included a dance in her act and tried hard to be sillier and loosen up. The next time she got the opportunity to go on the road, she'd be ready. Opportunity arrived the next summer when Pee Wee King and the Golden West Cowboys invited Minnie to join their traveling show.
A lot of times we slept on each other's shoulder. One would drive while we were going to another. We never, hardly ever stay all night in the same town where we played, because we had to go to another town. And a lot of times we'd put our blankets out on the ground and sleep on the ground. Wouldn't have time to check in a motel or anything.
Within weeks, the Pee Wee King Show signed on to join the Camel Caravan, sponsored by the R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company. The Camel Caravan toured around the country, entertaining the troops at military and naval bases as they readied for war. Minnie performed nearly every day for 19 months, sometimes 3 times a day.
So when that was over, she was a veteran, virtually. In other words, she had Minnie Pearl down to that point that nobody was going to shake her really again, and they never did. So many people by that time had seen her on the Camel Caravan that it was very easy for her to get any bookings that she wanted, and very quickly became one of the most popular stars on the Grand Ole Opry, and is today.
I don't want to hurt nobody because I know what it is to be hurt. It may not show, but love has kicked me in the face.
It shows, all right.
In early 1942, while Minnie was touring Florida with the Camel Caravan, the agency that handled Prince Albert Tobacco asked her to appear on the half-hour network portion of the Grand Ole Opry broadcast. Only the 3 or 4 biggest stars were included in this network part of the show, heard all across the country. The night of her first network broadcast, Minnie was pacing backstage when she was hit in the head with a sandbag. She performed in a daze, but it was good enough to get her a coveted slot as a regular from that night on. Another accident that worked out for the best occurred the night Minnie put some dime store flowers on her hat and then walked out on stage. During her act, the price tag on the flowers dropped down to dangle from the hat brim. It got a laugh and has stayed in the act ever since. Today, it's as identifiable a trademark as George Burns' cigar, Bob Hope's nose, or Jack Benny's violin.
So by now, Minnie is in her mid-30s. She's a big star. She's on the network radio show, so she's a star all over the country. She's making very good money for those days and those times, and she has a very happy life. And the last thing on her mind was getting married.
Henry Cannon was a pilot in the Army Air Corps when mutual friends introduced him to Minnie Pearl. He was as reserved as Minnie was outgoing, but they shared a finely tuned sense of humor. On February 23rd, 1947, Minnie and Henry were married.
I have to tell you that Henry Cannon is one of the funniest men in the entire world. He's the kind of person who can say an ordinary thing, doesn't crack a smile, looks at you with kind of a twinkle in his eye, and you fall out laughing just because it's so off the wall. He thinks funny.
She'd try to get him to come out on stage, and he wouldn't. He'd just stand back there with his hands in his pockets. But he is such a gentleman, and they had this wonderful, wonderful relationship.
For a year after they were married, Minnie quit the road, performing only on Saturday nights at the Opry. But she missed the travel, her buddies, and the fans. Henry, who together with a partner owned an air charter service, flew Minnie and her Opry friends from date to date and then back to Nashville on Saturday.
So little by little, as Minnie got more and more and more bookings, he started not only flying her to dates, but flying a lot of the other country music stars. He flew Hank Williams a lot. He flew Elvis a lot.
There is not a town in America that she hasn't played, at the high school or the wherever, you know. Minnie was the best because she'd been there and she'd done it. And she stayed at all those crummy motels and played all those joints and have people drunk and carry them. She'd done it all. And she just knew what people were about, especially country people.
I thought I'd get the latest news from Grinder Switch before I come up here tonight, and Lord have mercy, I found out Ms. Orson Tugwell has just had her 16th young'un. Yes, sir, she's had 16 altogether. Well, not altogether either, 1, 2 at a time. But she...
The Life and Times of Minnie Pearl returns in a moment on TNN.
Of one nutritious dog food. Purina Dog Chow brand dog food every...
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to This Is Your Life. Now, have you ever wanted to see someone being made up for a television show? Well, tonight's principal subject is in the makeup room right now here at NBC. Our camera is hidden behind a closed door. Now,
in 1957, television was still in its infancy. One of the most popular shows was Ralph Edwards' This Is Your Life. Minnie Pearl, already a national star on radio, was showcased on one of them. Network executives were favorably impressed with her personality and natural manner on camera.
as one of radio and television's most beloved and talented personalities, entertainers, an entertainer for the past 17 years, Minnie Pearl of the Grand Ole Opry.
Television had found Minnie.
You fall out of that makeup chair. Let me say something that you know already tonight. This is your life.
Oh, Ralph.
Throughout her career, Minnie would appear on countless television programs. To many viewers, she was best known as a regular on Hee Haw. One of her favorites was the Tennessee Ernie Ford Show.
Ladies and gentlemen, from Grinder Switch, Cousin Minnie Pearl. Well, listen to
Proud to be here. And here it is.
What is it?
I made it myself.
Oh, look at here.
Yeah, I don't aim to brag, but there's two things that I sure can make.
Yeah.
And one of them's potato salad, and the other one's coconut pie.
Yeah. Which one's this?
Minnie and country comedian Rod Brassfield hooked up on the Opry, started doing routines together, and brought them ready-made into television.
Her and Rod Brassfield done the best job I've ever seen in my life, two comedians working together.
Rodney, you know Uncle Uncle Nabob loves to go fishing. He does it to get out of work, you know.
Sure,
He ain't a failure. He just started at the bottom, and he likes it there, you know. And
Rod and Minnie became dear friends as well as comic partners up until his untimely death in 1958. But Minnie's closest professional relationship has always been with Roy Acuff.
Minnie and Roy Acuff had a relationship that was probably closer than any other person that she had outside of Henry Cannon, her husband. It went to a caring, blood-related kind of brother and sister type of feeling for each other. Roy was very protective of her, and she was very protective of him.
She's trying to learn to drive a car at her age.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and when she says, guess who I ran into today, she ain't kidding. Roy, don't tell them it's a new one. Make them. No, now, I tell you.
She would come out and work these matinees with him just to spend 30 minutes on stage with him together. Great, great moments. And I know that she cherished those moments, and I know he did too.
I had trouble with my throat, and I went to the doctor, and he gave me some medicine, and it like to kill me. It wasn't the medicine hurt me, it's the directions on the bottle. Said take it 2 nights of running and skip a night.
The Life and Times of Minnie Pearl returns in a moment on TNN.
Sing along with it. Old friend.
Be a part of gospel music history. Call now.
The Life and Times of Minnie Pearl continues on TNN.
Am I still in that same key? I just know 2 keys. One of them's C and the other one ain't.
Yeah, everything she did was funny. When she went on the stage, she entertained. And our band would back her up, you know. She'd always sing,
Jealous hearted me.
Jealous hearted me.
I'm jealous. Yeah. Jealous hearted me.
He used to sing a few songs on the stage and play the piano. Something about her bulldog. I don't know what it was.
Now I've got a man and a bulldog too. My man don't fight, but my bulldog do. I'm jealous. Jealous hearted me.
Well, I've heard her routines for years, and they were always funny to me. And one reason, I guess, I knew the punchlines to most everything, but she'd tell it different every time.
Old feller, you know, he never had rid of airplanes.
Yeah.
And he took a notion, he's over in Knoxville, Tennessee, he took a notion he'd take an airplane back over here. Well, you know, Knoxville is on different time than Nashville, you know, they're on Eastern time.
Yeah, an hour ahead of us.
Yeah, that's right. Well, sir, he walked up to the feller at the airport, and he says, what time does your next plane leave for Nashville? And the feller said, 4 o'clock. Uncle Nabob says, what time does it get to Nashville? And the feller says, 4 o'clock. Uncle went over and sat down on the bench, and the feller says to him, don't you want to buy a ticket? Uncle Nabob said, no, but if you don't mind, I'd like to just sit here and watch it take off.
You know what Minnie told me once? She said, you get a good horse, ride it. And that's what she stuck to, was the material that people laughed at. And even though people heard her jokes over and over again, all down through the years, she still used those same routines and got those laughs every time.
Oh, we had the most excitement last week. It was Aunt Ambrosia and Uncle Nabob's 50th wedding anniversary. Just think, 50 years together. That morning, Aunt Ambrosia woke up and she said to him, she said, just think, we've been married 50 years today. Go out and kill the biggest rooster we've got. And Uncle Nabob said, now, why would you blame a chicken for something that happened 50 years ago?
My favorite Minnie Pearl joke is she was walking down the sidewalk and she passed a Catholic church, and there's a gentleman coming down the steps. And being friendly as Minnie is, she looked at him and said, Mass out? And he replied, no, but your hat's on crooked.
And then she got mugged and robbed. And she told the guy that she didn't have no money, you know. The guy went through her purse, and she said, well, I don't have any money. He said, then he searched me. He said, boy, he really patted me down. And I told him, I said, I told you I didn't have no money, but if you'll do that again, I'll write you a check.
The old lady down there, yeah, that's always, in the way she told it, the paper had come out to do an interview on her, and she was 98 years old or something like that, and they said, well, Miss Daisy, have you ever been bedridden? And she said, yes, quite a few times, and once in a buggy. But you're not going to put that in the paper, are you?
You know, them mail order house catalogs.
Yeah.
And I sent off one of them. And I got me some of them little old lacy doodads, you know.
Men.
And they got them little embroidered sayings on them.
You got some of them?
Yeah, but them sayings is a mite fast for me. I had them put on mine, sincerely yours.
Lady calls up the fire department. She says, come over quick. My house is on fire. The fireman says, how do we get there? She said, ain't y'all still got that red truck?
A brother was walking down the road the other day with a chain over his shoulder, dragging the chain. Brother, and someone said, why are you, brother, dragging that chain, brother? And he said, you ever try to push one?
I can't help it if I'm young and full of pep. Oh, I'll tell you right now, it runs in my family, Carl. Trying to hold me back is just like trying to shoot off a cannon a little at a time.
It was her particular genius, you know, that she had that of being able to touch on country people, know what they were feeling, know their insecurities. But Minnie found a niche for herself, even though she wasn't musical. And yet she was musical, of course.
I'm jealous. Jealous-hearted me. I'm just a jealous. Ooh, best I can be.
The Life and Times of Minnie Pearl returns in a moment on TNN.
Cousin Minnie Pearl.
I'm just so proud to be here. Webster, I'm so excited to be in living color. I'm doing well at my age to be living.
In 1961, the Country Music Association began naming worthy performers to the Country Music Hall of Fame. More than anything else, Minnie Pearl longed for this honor.
Minnie had waited a long time to be inducted into the Hall of Fame, and she would go every year hoping that, you know, it would be her time.
Well, I knew that they had to give it to her sooner or later. I mean, there was just no way around it. She was too beloved in the country field to keep ignoring her just because she wasn't musical. Country music to me is not only about music, it's about the heart and humor and what country people are about. And she portrayed that better than anybody.
This is quite a thrill and a big night for me. This person joined the Grand Ole Opry in 1940. After college years, our newest Hall of Famer toured southern rural areas producing plays and musicals. It was on those tours that the person we honor tonight met the honest and fascinating rural characters that were to change her life. She developed a character that became the best-known name in country music comedic circles. Ladies and gentlemen, the 1975 inductee into the Country Music Hall of Fame is Mrs. Sarah Ophelia Colley Cannon, known as Minnie Pearl.
And so it was in Nashville one night in May 1975 that Sarah Ophelia Colley Cannon, known to all as Minnie Pearl, who never had a hit song or played a serious note of music, was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. Her likeness in bronze was hung beside her peers. Roy Acuff, Hank Williams Sr., Uncle Dave Macon, Pee Wee King. She had strode many a stage and logged countless country miles with them. It was fitting.
Thank you very much. We have so little time, and I can just say one more time, thank you to all of you, all the people who made this possible. Thank you, and God bless you. I love you, everyone. Thank you so much.
The induction into the Hall of Fame was one of the high points as far as her career was concerned, and it meant everything to her.
Don't seem like it had been an opera. It hadn't been for her jokes and all of her stuff like that. She kept everybody laughing all the time on the stage.
She'll be remembered as one of the great entertainers of all time.
Those characters like Bob Hope and Minnie Pearl were characters that were created that became bigger than life. And we don't have that anymore. It's sad that we don't. So I look at her thinking that she is the end of a generation.
And the appeal of Minnie Pearl, too, is that she is a young girl, no matter how old Sarah Cannon is. Minnie Pearl is a young girl who doesn't have a care in the world. The only thing she's worried about is either what she's going to wear to church on Sunday or trying to get a feller to take her to the dance.
For us, we're just thankful that we had those times with her, that she graced our Grand Ole Opry stage and entertained so many millions of people around the world.
She was always ready to go, ready to go. She was a show woman for I ever seen. I've never seen like it. Everybody will remember Minnie Pearl, I'll tell you that.
He's so timid it's sin, but he's still a M-A-N, and that's good enough for me.
When I got a yeast infection, I called my doctor, and she told me something I never knew. She said, you can start using Monistat 7 cream right now to relieve the itching. I didn't know that. Turns out the very same Monistat cream I use for a cure at night, I can also use for fast relief of external itching during the day. No wonder my doctor thinks so highly of it. Monistat.
And she had driven the car into the living room. And he said, well, how did you do that? She said, well, it wasn't easy. When I got in the dining room, I had to make a left turn. But we had the most excitement last week. It was Aunt Ambrosie and Uncle Nabob's 50th wedding anniversary. Just think, 50 years together. That morning, Aunt Ambrosie woke up and she said to him, she said, just think, we've been married 50 years today. Go out and kill the biggest rooster we've got. And Uncle Nabob said, now, why would you blame a chicken for something that happened 50 years ago? But they had a party that night, and somebody said to Uncle Nabob, said, in all these 50 years, I don't guess you ever considered divorce. And Uncle Nabob said, no, murder maybe, but never divorce. But everybody brung presents, and somebody brung Uncle Nabob a pair of monogram pajamas. And I said, ain't that nice, Uncle Nabob, monogram pajamas? He said, I wouldn't have a pair. It's the silliest thing I ever heard of. I said, well, Uncle Nabob, lots of folks sleeps in monogram pajamas. Uncle Nabob